China launches 520 missiles at a U.S. Navy task force. 12 American warships fire every defensive missile in their arsenal, 450 weapons, in the most desperate naval battle since World War II. October 15, 2025. East China Sea, 240 nautical miles east of Shanghai. At 3:47 a.m., 12 U.S. Navy warships operating as Surface Action Group Bravo detected massive radar activity from coastal China. Within seconds, the assessment became clear and terrifying. China was launching a saturation attack designed to overwhelm American defenses through sheer numbers. The formation consisted of 8 Ticonderoga-class cruisers and 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, a concentration of Aegis combat power, unprecedented outside of carrier strike groups. But even this formidable force was about to face a threat that would push their defensive systems beyond design limits. The Chinese attack employed every available anti-ship weapon system. 240 DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles launched from mobile launchers across Zhejiang and Fujian provinces. These weapons, traveling at Mach 10 during terminal descent, were designed to overwhelm defenses with speed and maneuverability. 180 YJ-18 supersonic cruise missiles fired from surface ships, submarines, and coastal batteries approached at Mach 2.5 from multiple directions, and 100 CJ-10 subsonic cruise missiles, slower but more numerous, added to the overwhelming wave. Total count, 520 missiles, converging on 12 American ships from ranges between 200 and 400 kilometers. The task force commander, Rear Admiral Marcus Hayes aboard USS Gettysburg, had approximately 18 minutes from first detection to first impact. In that time, his ships needed to detect, track, prioritize, and engage over 500 targets while maintaining formation integrity and avoiding fratricide. The Aegis combat system, designed for exactly this scenario, would coordinate defenses across all 12 ships, but the scale of the attack exceeded anything the system had been tested against. At 3:49 a.m., Admiral Hayes transmitted the order that every sailor dreaded but trained for, all ships weapons free, engage all threats. This is not a drill. At 3:50 a.m., the 12 ships' vertical launch systems began firing. The SM-2 Block 3B missiles, with 90 nautical mile range, launched first to engage the ballistic missile threat at maximum distance. 48 SM-2s streaked skyward within 90 seconds. Their mission to intercept DF-21Ds before they began terminal descent. The missiles climbed to altitudes exceeding 80,000 feet, where their radar seekers would detect the descending Chinese warheads and execute intercept maneuvers. But 240 ballistic missiles meant each American interceptor, even if perfectly successful, could only address 5 targets. The mathematics were unfavorable. At 3:52 a.m., the first SM-2s engaged DF-21D warheads at 65,000 feet. The intercepts, occurring in the upper atmosphere, where air is thin and margins for error minuscule, achieved a 62% success rate. 30 ballistic missiles were destroyed, but 210 continued descending toward the task force, now entering the atmosphere at velocities exceeding 3 kilometers per second. At 3:54 a.m., the ships fired their SM-6 missiles, advanced interceptors capable of engaging both ballistic and cruise missile threats at ranges exceeding 250 kilometers. 96 SM-6s launched, targeting the descending ballistic missiles and the leading edge of the cruise missile wave. Between 3:55 and 3:58 a.m., the SM-6s achieved remarkable results. 84 more ballistic missiles were destroyed at altitudes between 40,000 and 20,000 feet. 72 cruise missiles, detected at ranges between 180 and 120 kilometers, were engaged and destroyed, but the expenditure was unsustainable. The task force had already fired 144 defensive missiles and destroyed 186 threats. but 334 missiles remained inbound, with 126 ballistic missiles now in terminal descent, 108 supersonic cruise missiles at medium range, and 100 subsonic cruise missiles approaching from multiple vectors. Should ships prioritize defending themselves or coordinating fleet-wide defense? Type A for individual ship survival, Type B for mutual support maximizing total survival. Comment your tactical reasoning. At 3:59 a.m., the Aegis systems recalculated priorities based on remaining threats and ammunition. The SM-2 inventory was exhausted across half the ships, SM-6 stocks were at 40%, and the ballistic missiles, now below 15,000 feet and traveling at Mach 8, required immediate engagement with remaining interceptors or close-in defenses. At 4 a.m., the ships fired their remaining SM-6 missiles and transitioned to evolved Sea Sparrow missiles for terminal defense. The ESSM, a shorter-range but highly maneuverable missile designed for last-ditch intercepts, became the final layer before close-in weapon systems. Between 4:00 and 4:03 a.m., the 12 ships fired 128 ESSM missiles in rapid succession. These weapons engaged threats at ranges between 25 and 8 kilometers, intercepting ballistic missiles during their final descent and cruise missiles closing at supersonic speeds. The intercept rate was remarkable: 89 threats destroyed, but 245 missiles continued inbound. At 4:03 a.m., the ballistic missiles entered terminal phase. 37 DF-21Ds, having survived all defensive layers, were descending toward the task force at Mach 7. The warheads, each carrying 500 kilograms of high explosive, were making final maneuvers to evade defenses. At 4:04 a.m., the ship's rolling airframe missile systems engaged. Ram launchers with 21 missiles per ship fired every weapon in rapid sequence. The Rams, infrared-guided missiles, designed for extremely close-range intercepts, destroyed 24 ballistic missiles at altitudes below 3,000 feet and ranges under 4 kilometers. Subscribe to Navy Mission now for unmatched naval defense operations coverage. This is analysis that reveals modern warfare reality. But 13 ballistic missiles penetrated all defensive layers. At 4:04 and 30 seconds, the Phalanx close-in weapon systems activated. 6 ships positioned where they could engage without hitting friendly vessels fired their 20mm Gatling guns at incoming warheads. The sound was deafening. Multiple Phalanx systems firing simultaneously at 4,500 rounds per minute created walls of tungsten that filled the air with metal. 9 ballistic missiles were destroyed or deflected at ranges between 500 and 400 meters, but 4 warheads penetrated even this final defense. At 4:04 and 47 seconds, USS Gettysburg was struck by a DF-21D warhead traveling at Mach 6. The kinetic impact alone before the warhead detonated punched through the cruiser's superstructure. The 500-kilogram explosive then detonated inside the ship, devastating the Combat Information Center and forward VLS. 43 sailors were killed instantly. The cruiser, flagship of the task force, was critically damaged and lost all command capability. Rear Admiral Hayes in the CIC when the missile struck was among the dead. At 4:04 and 52 seconds, USS Vicksburg was struck by 2 ballistic missiles within 3 seconds. The first hit amidships, destroying the ship's propulsion. The second struck aft, detonating the magazine and causing catastrophic secondary explosions. Vicksburg, a 9,600-ton cruiser that had served for over 30 years, broke in half and began sinking. Her crew, trained for damage control, fought desperately to save the ship, but the damage was beyond any possibility of control. At 4:08 a.m., the captain ordered abandon ship. Vicksburg sank at 4:15 a.m., taking 67 sailors down with her. The remaining crew, 280 survivors, was later rescued by other ships. At 4:05 a.m., USS Cape St. George was struck by 1 ballistic missile that hit the after superstructure. The damage was severe. the helicopter hangar destroyed, the aft VLS obliterated, and major fires started. But the cruiser's forward sections remained intact. Damage control teams contained the fires and prevented magazine detonations. Cape St. George survived but was combat ineffective, listing 5 degrees and unable to defend herself. While the ballistic missile engagement concluded, 208 cruise missiles, 108 supersonic YJ-18s, and 100 subsonic CJ-10s continued closing on the task force. The ships had expended their SM-2, SM-6, and ESSM inventories. Ram launchers were empty. Only Phalanx guns and electronic warfare systems remained. At 4:05 a.m., with cruise missiles at ranges between 35 and 15 kilometers, the situation was desperate. Admiral Hayes's death meant USS Chosen's captain, Captain Sarah Mitchell, assumed tactical command of the surviving formation. At 4:06 a.m., Captain Mitchell made decisions that would determine whether the task force survived or was annihilated. She ordered all ships to execute emergency maneuvers, turning to present minimal profiles to incoming missiles. Electronic warfare systems activated at maximum power, jamming missile seekers, and ships positioned themselves to provide mutual phalanx coverage, accepting risks of friendly fire to maximize defensive firepower against the overwhelming threat. The YJ-18 supersonic missiles arrived first. At 4:07 a.m., 43 missiles closed to within 8 kilometers. Phalanx systems across the task force engaged, firing thousands of rounds per second. 26 missiles were destroyed at ranges between 2,000 and 800 meters, but 17 missiles penetrated. At 4:07 and 30 seconds, USS Cowpens was struck by 3 YJ-18s in rapid succession. The supersonic impacts and detonations devastated the destroyer. The ship struck in the bow, amidships, and stern was effectively destroyed. She remained afloat but was a burning wreck. 93 sailors were killed. The survivors abandoned ship. At 4:08 a.m., the CJ-10 subsonic cruise missiles arrived. These weapons, slower but more numerous and approaching from multiple directions, created targeting problems for the already saturated Phalanx systems. 54 missiles closed to within 5 kilometers simultaneously. The Phalanx guns engaged continuously, barrels glowing red from sustained fire. 38 missiles were destroyed, but 16 penetrated. USS Port Royal was struck by 2 CJ-10s that destroyed her superstructure and started uncontrollable fires. 42 sailors died. The ship would survive but required months of repairs. By 4:10 a.m., the attack was over. 520 Chinese missiles had engaged 12 American ships. 487 had been destroyed by layered defenses, a 93.7% intercept rate that represented extraordinary performance. But 33 missiles had penetrated. 3 ships were sunk or sinking. USS Vicksburg went down with all hands unable to escape. USS Cowpens was abandoned and scuttled hours later, and USS Cape St. George was so damaged she was later declared a constructive total loss. An additional 3 ships were severely damaged. Total casualties: 247 sailors killed, 312 wounded. Do you think a 93.7% intercept rate represents Aegis success or failure when facing saturation attacks? And share your assessment below. For the surviving ships, the hours after the engagement were desperate. Damage control teams fought fires in sealed compartments. Medical personnel treated hundreds of wounded with limited supplies. And rescue operations recovered survivors from the water, including 280 from Vicksburg and 93 from Cowpens. The 9 surviving operational ships formed a defensive perimeter while calling for assistance from other U.S. Navy forces. For China, October 15th represented a Pyrrhic victory. The saturation attack had sunk 3 American ships and damaged 3 more, but the cost was 520 missiles, representing approximately $2.5 billion in expended weapons and months of production capacity. The strike had depleted China's anti-ship missile inventory to levels requiring years to rebuild. And strategically, 9 American ships survived and remained operational, capable of continuing missions. The exchange ratio, measured in dollars and strategic effect, favored neither side clearly. For the United States, the engagement reshaped understanding of naval warfare in the missile age. Saturation attacks could overwhelm even the most advanced defenses. The Aegis system had performed remarkably, destroying over 93% of incoming threats. But perfect defense was impossible. Future operations would require larger defensive missile inventories, improved intercept rates through better sensors and weapons, and tactical deployments that dispersed targets rather than concentrating them. The 247 sailors who died had demonstrated both the capabilities and limitations of modern naval air defense. The families of the dead received notifications within hours. Memorial services were held aboard surviving ships and at bases worldwide. The sailors who died, from 19-year-old seamen to senior officers, had served knowing combat was possible. Their sacrifice had prevented even greater disaster. If not for their professional execution of defensive procedures, all 12 ships might have been lost. As the sun rose on October 15th, 3 American warships were gone. 3 more were barely afloat, and 9 survived battered but operational. The engagement had demonstrated that modern naval warfare involved offensive and defensive firepower on scales that dwarfed previous eras. The task force had fired 450 defensive missiles, every weapon in their magazines, and survived. The lesson was clear. In the missile age, survival requires not just capable systems, but sufficient ammunition to defeat saturation attacks, and sometimes even that isn't enough. Now I want 3 perspectives from you. First, should navies prioritize larger missile magazines or better intercept technology to counter saturation attacks? Second, what does this engagement reveal about the vulnerability of surface warships in modern conflict? Third, are Aegis ships still viable for high-threat operations, or do saturation attacks make them too vulnerable? Comment your detailed strategic analysis below. Your insights drive the conversations we have on Navy Mission, and if this breakdown of the most desperate naval defense engagement in modern history gave you new understanding of saturation warfare, prove it by hitting that like button, subscribing to Navy Mission, and turning on notifications. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay defended, and remember that survival in modern naval combat is measured in missiles expended and seconds remaining.